Welcome. My name is Boran Horiak. I'm a retired journalist, now living in Florida. Long ago, I worked for the Associated Press and I reported from Ukraine. I lived in Ukraine for years, in Kiev and in Lviv. My family's from Ukraine, and as you can imagine, what is happening in Ukraine right now lacerates my heart. And what I'm going to be talking about in this video is the fear that you see in the White House and in Europe is not justified. Putin has been rattling the nuclear sword, and I'm going to claim that his sword is made out of wood, and I'll give you the reasons why. And it's a shame that there hasn't been shown more courage from the White House and from the European Union. Just think, what courageous act has come out of the White House in the past 2 months or from Europe? Putin has been escalating and doing worse and worse and worse because there has been no real pushback. He needs a strong punch in the face because only that he will respect. So I am pleading for a little more courage and take some risk, because that is the only way to stop Putin. Otherwise, in a year's time, Ukraine will be bleeding on the floor, dying, and its country will be in rubble. And if that is allowed to happen, something will die in the spirit of America and Europe, and it's not necessary. Let's have the courage, as I explained, that John F. Kennedy had long ago. I'm going to disappear in a minute from view, and I will present this program telling you my reasons and illustrating with a lot of photographs, and then I will come back at the end and talk a little bit about Russian character and the Russian soul, because it's important to kind of understand what really makes up the Russians. And I want to apologize because I wish I could produce such a wonderful, great video like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but he had a lot of help, I can tell you. Give me a little leeway because I have glaucoma, and this year I'm going to be 85 years old. July 4th, 2022, Independence Day. This is what the Ukrainians are fighting for. They want to save their soul and they want to be independent. So here we go. When the war started, there was a constant refrain from the White House and the Pentagon of, we don't want to provoke them, we don't want to start World War III. That must have pleased Putin immensely. He was playing nuclear chicken and he was winning. He had done the same thing in 2014 when Russia grabbed Ukraine's Crimea. He did it again the following year, rattling the nuclear sword against Denmark because it was applying to join NATO. Tragically, the lack of courage by President Biden may exhaust and cripple the people of Ukraine so much that they may not recover for generations. Can you imagine the children now shaking in basements for weeks and weeks as bombs and missiles detonate around them? Children looking at the faces of their terrified mothers? This will create a lifetime of traumas. Or take the wounded Ukrainian soldier returning to his hometown. His home may be a pile of rubble with many of his family and friends dead. Despite his bravery, he is wounded for life. He may never recover. I assure you there will be thousands and thousands like him when peace finally comes. How does it feel to walk through the block after block of your town, going by high-rise buildings that look like dried skeletons. The horror continues. Although Russia will concentrate on the Donbass, it will continue raining thousands of bombs and missiles on all of Ukraine. Western cynics will say, why should we take any risks for Ukraine? Putin is finished. If not in months, then in a year or two. All we have to do is wait and not provoke Putin. After all, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. A few days ago, General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, said he expected the war to, quote, last for years, for sure, unquote. If this is depressing, let's remember that every prediction Milley made before the war started turned out to be wrong. I cannot understand why President Biden and NATO keep tiptoeing around Putin. He has been constantly escalating and acting while the West has been constantly reacting. It is Putin who should be scared. After the war started, Poland bravely offered 29 of its MiG fighter jets to Ukraine if America would replace these airplanes. Biden said no. Yet look how bravely and effectively the Ukrainian pilots have defended Ukraine's skies against Russian Air Force 5 times larger. Ukraine wasn't asking American pilots to fly over Ukraine. It was asking for the badly needed jet MiGs, which Ukrainian pilots know how to fly. Also, from the beginning, Ukraine has been begging the United States for Patriot anti-missile systems that could reduce the Russian missile and bomb carnage from the skies. Stingers cannot reach very high. They were refused, and one of the reasons given for not sending these Patriot batteries to Ukraine was, believe it or not, that this would, quote, provoke, unquote, Russia. Several NATO countries have Israel's excellent Iron Dome anti-missile system. They are willing to give it to Ukraine if compensated, but they cannot. America has sent a lot of help to Ukraine, for which Ukrainians are immensely grateful. Some think it is too much, but when America was in Iraq, it was spending $8 billion every month, year after year. Sanctions won't stop the Russian meat grinder. Russians are tough, and they think suffering, deprivation, and injustice are normal aspects of life. They have to hit a brick wall to stop. Biden is the commander-in-chief, so the buck stops with him. I wish he has shown the courage of President John Kennedy in 1962. That year, American intelligence discovered that the Soviet Union had started installing nuclear missiles in Cuba. Kennedy ordered a blockade. No ships would be allowed to enter or leave Cuba. For weeks, there were cries and protests in America and around the world. World War III, World War III. This went on for a month until the Soviet Premier, Nikita Khrushchev, ordered the missiles to be returned to Russia. Let's look at this fear and terror of starting World War III. Let's say Ukraine got those 29 MiGs and Putin didn't like it. What would he do? Declare war on NATO? He can't handle Ukraine. Intercontinental nuclear missiles will be flying at America. Really? There's no such thing as Russia getting away with a nuclear attack on America. There's only mutual destruction. In effect, Putin would be murdering his own country and committing suicide. Oh, but Putin is crazy. He could do it. I am certain he doesn't have a nuclear button under his desk. He would have to give the order to his nuclear command. To get those missiles flying would take at least a little time and require several people. They wouldn't be the average zombified Russian who only listens to Russian TV. They would know what is going on, what Russia is doing in Ukraine. They would know Putin has just asked them to destroy Russia, kill their families, and commit suicide. Would they do it? Would they obey? Then I can hear the cry, "Oh, but Russia has a lot of battlefield nuclear weapons. They're awful." I have done some research on this. Such weapons weren't really built until the 1960s. Yet in the past 60 years, not one country, not one army has used them on the battlefield. Was it because these countries were so moral and kind? After all, Russia carpet bombed the city of Grozny in Chechnya and killed more than 150,000 people. You heard that right, more than 150,000 people. And Putin got away with it, just as he did in the, to quote, special military operations in Georgia, Crimea, Syria, and the Donbass in Ukraine. There, in the past 8 years in Donbass, more than 14,000 people have been killed and more than 30,000 wounded. The Russians have a lot of practice in the use of artillery and bombs. Nuclear weapons were not used because they are not practical or effective in winning battles. It's like killing flies with a shotgun. Suppose the airfield is destroyed by a nuclear weapon. It means the attacker cannot use the airfield or occupy the surrounding land for miles around. Have Russian soldiers been issued Geiger counters? Using such weapons would also signal to the world the bankruptcy of Putin's army. It is now like a muscle-bound gorilla reduced to killing civilians. But boy, using just one battlefield nuclear weapon by Russia would certainly terrify the world. Oh my God, Putin has gone nuclear. When Dmitry Medvedev was president of Russia some years ago, he said Russia would use nuclear weapons only if another country struck Russia or its allies with nuclear weapons. If Russia's nuclear infrastructure was affected, or if an attack on Russia jeopardized its existence. The West certainly has no plans to invade Russia or bomb Moscow. Remember, too, Putin is a coward. Look how frightened he is of the COVID virus. He has lived in virtual isolation for 2 years. Lenin once said, if you stick a bayonet into an enemy and find softness, plunge right in. If you find hardness, withdraw. The only hardness Putin has faced so far is from the Ukrainian army and air force. It has had to fight mostly defensively, blowing up tanks, armored vehicles, and airplanes, and also in combat with its soldiers on the ground. But it is poor in offensive weapons. Only with offensive weapons will the Ukrainian army be able to push Russia out of the Donbass. Will providing offensive weapons to Ukraine be viewed by the West as provocative? If the sky is open to Russian bombs and missiles, if they can have several months to operate unchecked, you'll get a shell-shocked nation no matter how brave its people are. The body doesn't understand courage, it understands stress. I can understand what a difficult and serious problem President Biden is facing. Despite a pseudo-neutrality, China is on the side of Russia. Its controlled media has been constantly rebroadcasting the lies of Russian media. I just watched a long interview on Sky News with Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman. He was pressed pretty hard by the interviewer, but there was not the slightest hint of embarrassment, guilt, or discomfort as he calmly said the Bucha atrocities were staged by Ukrainians and were fake news. Peskov sounded a little bored, as if he was describing sausage making. I think the next weeks will reveal what values America and NATO truly hold. Will they simply wait until the sanctions really bite, but Ukraine is a wreck and its people decimated? If that happens, something will die in the spirit of Europe and America. Ukraine is worth taking some risks and calling Putin's bluff. Welcome back. Okay, now the question is, what can President Biden and the European Union do? I keep harking on President Biden because, in a sense, he's the leader of the free world, of the Western world. What he does means so much, influences so much what the European Union will be doing. And it's really quite simple. Number one, the West must bite the bullet. In other words, put up with some pain. And this essentially means stop taking all that gas and oil from Russia. Right now, Russia is earning $380 billion a day from its gas and oil. If that stopped, I know it would be very difficult. That would really get Putin's attention. The second thing is give the Ukrainians offensive lethal weapons. They've gotten a ton of defensive weapons and they use them very effectively. But the next big fight is going to be in the Donbass, and the Ukrainians cannot just work with defensive weapons because they have to push the Russians back to Russia. So look how I explained how restrictive and fearful the White House has been. Oh, you can't have those MiG jets. That's provocative. You can't have the Patriot system or the Iron Dome system. Maybe that'll be provocative too. That is ridiculous. Putin has to get a strong punch in the face. That'll get his attention. He's a KGB thug. He rose with the help of the Russian mafia. He doesn't respect these things. You can't talk to him about integrity and honor and decency. You have to put him in a position where he has no choice. Now, the Russian character. I have another video where I talk much more about it, called What Makes the Ukrainians Fight So Hard, and I recommend it to you. But briefly, you have to remember, autocracy has been the Russian way of ruling for centuries. They were 150 years under the Mongol yoke, and they essentially served the Mongols, collecting taxes for them and bringing it to Mongolia. And that creates a certain type of character, which means that Russians are kind of used to be in prison. They're used to be in a straitjacket. If you take a Russian who has been, let's say, half a lifetime in prison and give him freedom, when he comes out, he's lost. He doesn't know what to do. Oh, I can make my own decisions, but if I make my own decisions, if it doesn't work out, then it's my fault. If I just obey the others and it doesn't work out, then I'm not. It's not my responsibility. That is really in many of the Russians' characters, because if you look at their history, they've had autocracy almost throughout the last, I would say, 800 years. And there have been periods where liberalism, where the autocracy collapsed and liberalism appeared. And in a few years, the Russians came back to their character of really being slaves. Remember, the word Slavic comes from the word slave. So what can you do? It means that they need outside influence because they will not work from the inside, and this has produced a kind of a sickness in Russia. For example, Kirill, the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church, supports the war in Ukraine. And if you ask him, he doesn't really think that the Catholics or the Protestants are real Christians. It's the Orthodox that are the real Christians. And then there's the nationalism of Russia. They have a mission, they have a destiny, and it has been given to them by God. They're going to save the West from its degenerate ways. And they've been thinking about creating a third Rome, like the Roman Empire, for generations. And you know what? Finally, the great gift the Ukrainians would give to the world is they're going to put a stake through the heart of Russian imperialism. What I'm saying is, you have to influence the Russians from the outside, which means punching Putin in the face. So he starts being afraid. It's time that he became afraid, because right now he's simply angry. And folks, he can escalate even more. You think it's impossible after all those atrocities and so many civilians killed? Yeah. He can create a Grozny or an Aleppo in Ukraine. He would be willing to do that. But if there is a real pushback, that will encourage the Russians, because a lot of the Russians are thinking, hey, they told us that there was a special military operation and it would be over in a week, and we would denazify Ukraine and free all those Russian-speaking Ukrainians who were being killed by those Ukrainian Nazis. But look, it's been 6 weeks. Where is the liberation? Where is the denazism? And all these military funerals around us in all the villages. What the hell is happening? So the Russians, at this point, might not care very much that Ukraine is being traumatized, but when the sanctions really bite in, and they don't have bread on the table, and they're out of work, that'll get their attention, and then they will wonder if Putin should remain their great leader. So I am pleading for a little courage to take a risk, because Ukraine is worth it. In a sense, Ukraine is fighting for the soul of democracy in the West. If it is destroyed, can you imagine the guilt that so many people will feel in Europe and in America? It's worth biting the bullet and having some discomfort, having high gas prices and so on, because it's not forever. Russia is going down. Putin has made the biggest mistake of the last 100 years of any Russian leader. He had that smirk on his face all the time, that kind of the cat that ate the canary. He was looking at you and saying, I know the score and you don't, and I got your number. But finally, after so many things that he did that were really evil over the past 20 years, and he got no pushback. He got no pushback in Chechnya or Georgia or Crimea or Syria. Sanctions, big deal. They knew how to get around it. So please, talk to your congressman, senator, let's be a little more courageous. Let's take some risks. Let's save Ukraine, because this cannot keep going on. People are traumatized. The Ukrainians don't talk much about all their wounded soldiers and dead soldiers, but I tell you, they have a lot of them too. They say that about at least 12,000 Russian soldiers have been killed. And you can imagine that that means a lot of Ukrainian soldiers have been killed. And this is a poor country. Russia has 10 times the resources, 4 times the population. It's worth taking a risk for. And if you want to know a little bit more about the difference between the Russian and Ukrainian character, because what Putin said, that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, is a total lie. And he doesn't believe it himself, because he was saying some years ago, talking about years ago, how Ukrainians are brothers. And now he's killing his brothers in such brutal ways, people who have done him no harm, innocent civilians. This has got to stop. So the trouble with YouTube is that the only way to find me is to go to YouTube, type in Bo, B-O, Hodiak, H-O-D-I-A-K, and then click on Bo, and then you'll find me. And you'll also find my other video there. So I hope you found this interesting. Please tell others if you did, and thank you for watching.